Carbon was the fourth in the Need for Speed series to be based on the import scene with drag races, drift showdowns, and cars looking like they drove through a paint shop, the one that led the series to being evaluated after selling 6 million copies, which is pretty strong compared to other games released in 2006, but its predecessor, Most Wanted, sold around 16 million copies, which is a massive spike. The series was in a similar position with Hot Pursuit 2, so EA took a risk by diving into the rising popularity of the import scene, replacing the supercars and diverse scenery with bright city lights and cars that can be customized to go as fast, if not faster, than a Ferrari or Lamborghini. It proved to be a genius move, with the mid-2000s producing some of the highest selling titles of the Need for Speed series. However, not only was Carbon considered decent but otherwise disappointing, in the real world, the street racing culture was changing. I don't want to sound like the intro of every Need for Speed game in the 2000s, but it is an extremely dangerous endeavor and illegal. And by that point, the police were seriously cracking down on it, with street racers claiming that fines were getting heftier, and even stock Honda Civics were being regularly pulled over by the police, because that model was very popular with the tuner scene. So instead of continuing to push their luck, why not put what they do in a closed environment where they can drive as hard as they can, but not have to worry about the police or oncoming traffic? Basically, what if a street racing crew organized their own race weekend? What would they do if they had a circuit to themselves? If this was what they were doing now, turning that into a Need for Speed game, a series that has a rich history of street racing games, sounds like a no-brainer. Whatever you think of ProStreet, the developers knew what was going on in the real world and did their research. Need for Speed ProStreet was released for the PC, PlayStation 2, 3, Xbox 360, Nintendo Wii and DS on November 2007, and the PlayStation Portable on March 2008. I played this at a friend's house on the PlayStation 2 once, and never again after that. That's honestly the only memory I have of this game. I quit the series for a bit after Carbon, mostly because of weakened interest, becoming more interested in other games like Grand Theft Auto or Gran Turismo, not because of what the critics said. But that was over a decade ago, and after reviewing a couple of Forza Motorsport and Project Gotham racing games recently, in conjunction with the Need for Speed series, and about to get into Midnight Club again, I've been wondering why Need for Speed became critically worse compared to other racing franchises, and whether it deserved it, or if EA was just an easy target even back then. I just don't want to follow the trend of what other critics said in 2007 in my own words. I wanted to dissect exactly what is considered better or worse. That, and also because you ladies and gentlemen like it when I review Need for Speed games.
Come on, Chi-Town, make some noise! The top street racers have come to Chicago from all over America, because this is Battle Machine's.
You are former illegal street racer Ryan Cooper. Whether you like that name or not, too bad. And traveling worldwide in a track day competition. I'm the manager this time because my name isn't Ryan Cooper, and only I would attempt to convince a driver to race with a car that looks like this. Cooper is there to become the best, and he needs to win all the race days to reach the kings of each event type, with Rio Watanabe leading the throne as the Street King, even though it isn't set in the streets anymore. And he's essentially the quote antagonist in this game because he brags too much.
You know, yeah, okay, the guy won, but he did not look pretty behind the wheel. It physically pained me to watch that guy drive, you know what I'm saying? I don't know how he made it.
Ew, he's winning races. He's terrible. He should go back to the streets. Teo is old as time. He has about as much emotion as a brick wall. The plot is such a non-factor in the whole game, it's not worth going deep into. There are no shenanigans from Rio. The other kings never show their faces. The cutscenes only appear in the background, sometimes meshing through the menus and are fully in-game. Although I do hate that most of them can't be skipped. In fact, Ryan never shows his face either. It's like he's worried that he's going to get caught by the police for his street racing history, so he remains anonymous. It's what I prefer anyway, because there's no such thing as a good story in a Need for Speed game, and it means I can think more about driving.
This is his first big, quote-unquote, legal race. This guy's got mad skills. He's been street racing for a hot minute, and he totally just dominated a Battle Machine qualifier.
Staying legal is something that hadn't been done in Need for Speed up to that point. I guess you could count Need for Speed 2, but it was just the same as any 90s era title without traffic or police. Think of ProStreet as the Underground Racing League in Underground 2, only fully realized. It sets itself on airport strips, closed roads, and permanent racetracks, with the menus set in the pits for people to check out the wheels. Combining the import scene with legal motorsport increases the landscape diversity, like you're traveling around the world instead of one map that looks the same, including real tracks like Autopolis, Leipzig, Mondello, and Willow Springs. However, as gameplay is concerned, this was a very controversial move back in 2007, as it sacrifices a lot of what was fun about playing these games to begin with, including the wanted system and open map. It might surprise you that I'm not too bothered by it, because in Carbon and Most Wanted, you can literally skip every single destination to enter the events and avoid the heat anyway, and if I want to chase the police, I'll just play those games instead. Although if this was 2007, I would have been furious, because that would be like the Forza Horizon series taking away the open map in favor of close racing. That's what motorsport is for. What does bother me, however, is that it means there are less tracks to race on, like you're driving on the exact same circuit more than once. Because some of these are set in airport strips, dockyards, and fictional highways, it means they have plenty of space to work with. Like, they should have rearranged some of the stands and barriers, unless that would have compromised what the PlayStation 2 and Wii can handle. Speaking of that, everything outside the track, it's okay. Good to take liberties to fit with the track day theme. However, I think the billboards and signs, even by Need for Speed standards, are excessive. But being EA, they really need that advertising money, don't they? Anyway, whether you like it or not, that's where we're at with this game. Instead of an open map where you enter events and shops, you have a branch full of race days. A poorly navigated one, I might add, which expands the more you win. A race day has a few events in which a majority from the predecessors return, including Circuit, aka Grip, Drag, Drift, and Speed Challenge, aka Need for Speed 2, with plenty of variations including wheelie competition, which is actually good fun once you have the specifications set to a T. And Sector Shootout, which I feel the opposite about. At first I thought it was Speed Trap with a different name. The track is divided into sectors and you get points for completing them as quickly as possible. But I can't imagine where they were going with this event, because points only count if you're the fastest, missing out by even 1 point doesn't count, and the opponent in front is guaranteed to score points, so even if you beat all the sectors, that same opponent is going to take them back through the flying lap, which makes the whole thing unbalanced. I think I'm confusing myself. So all it comes down to is a quick lap and getting in front of the pack. And as for the rest of the events, I'm also a little confused. Grip class, for example. If the Group B cars are faster, why are they at the back, risking damage to your car? Which I'll get to. The drag event at the start, actually I'm perfectly fine with the idea of warming up your tyres. It's something you do in real life. However, I think setting them up in heats along with the drift event is a way to increase unnecessary gameplay time. Think about it, if you didn't come first, then you'll be restarting until you do anyway. It would have made more sense to add the grand total of all 3 heats, so you can't deliberately false start whenever you're confident enough with your best heat. Towards the end of the branch are the kings of each event, which is a one-on-one showdown against them based on their biggest strength: grip, drag, speed, and drift, with Rio optimal on all aspects, unless Ryan has anything to do with it. Competing in these is highly repetitive because all you're doing is the same event type the whole time. Like, you'll get sick of doing over 100 straight drag races, and because the showdowns themselves are a cakewalk. The difficulty curve up to this point is like Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest. The opponents will put up a fight, but when it comes to the actual showdown, they're pathetically easy. They might as well be called the peasant showdowns with these kind of performances. And on top of that, based on my experience, you don't need to beat them all to get to Rio. The big star, super promotional showdowns are the key. Because race days use a points threshold for advancing through the career mode, each event has a target time or point benchmark, meaning where you place and how long it takes to cross the line affect how many points you earn. Therefore, you don't need to place first every single time to advance. In fact, you can break the record while placing second. It took me a while to realize that because I'm so used to being forced to coming first that seeing anything less than that in the menu is unacceptable. It's only fun when you're winning, and only domination can earn you serious money. But what I didn't get initially is how lenient the target was. Like if you place it exactly, you're usually last place. That doesn't show confidence. It turns out that targets are also based on the car you're driving. I bought a Pagani Zonda later in the career mode thinking I've already beaten the game, and of course it would eat all the opponents for breakfast. But I noticed that I wasn't gaining as many points as the previous car, so make sure you're always going as quickly as possible no matter what you're driving. Also, notice the Ford Mustang on a straight line, BMW Z4 overtaking other drivers, and the Holden Monaro going sideways in a majority of the footage. That's because the cars you see are tuned for a unique event. I think it's a great idea. I like all car types for different reasons, except SUVs, and this game is set up in a way that you get to try them all out in one career path. Some race days even involve everyone using the same set of cars which they provide for you, and winning it gives you a choice of 2 of them as a prize. And of course, certain events require eligible cars before you can undertake in them. The only downside is that once you have a car set to a unique event, that's it, you can't change it, even if it's a car you win from one of the kings. Customization works exactly like Carbon. You can modify body kits, add vinyls, decals, enhance performance. In fact, the only addition they made visually is being able to paint individual body parts, with a few more decals and vinyls to boot. Unfortunately, whenever you install one with the option to move, reshape it, etc., it still moves too slowly. You have to painstakingly scroll through one graphic at a time, and it takes longer to load up. It was fine in Carbon because the majority of the graphics had preset positions just in case you didn't know where to place them. Here, it's quite tedious. Yeah, I'm probably saying that because Forza Motorsport by that point made strides to make customizing cars a more efficient experience. But that's the point, and Black Box developers didn't really do anything, apart from placing designated spots for vinyl positions. And that's why the Ford Mustang looks as it does. All I did was put random graphics on those spots because that's the best I can do based on creativity and patience, and it blends with what the opponents look like on the track. Like they're built for performance more than visual marvel. So if all you do is stamp vinyls out randomly, it works, perhaps. Although being ColourShed, the cars look more vibrant. Look at that, like a high visibility vest or sour candy. If you can persevere, you can create some striking looking cars. It's just disappointing that they didn't fix any of the issues from the predecessor. A good example of what happens when you only have a year to develop. Like Carbon, you can auto sculpt the shape of the body, but this applies everywhere and it affects performance. But from my experience, so partially I don't think about it that much. You'll spend more of your time tuning the performance aspect because for some of these events, it's mandatory, like the wheelie competition, not like Underground 2 where it was only optional. And make sure you go all out when purchasing upgrades and don't leave anything out. There was one moment when I tuned the drag car to the max because I was fed up with losing despite being 100% perfect on the gears and NOS, but accidentally forgot to upgrade the tires and did even worse. I'm not a huge fan, honestly. What I would have done is that in order to advance, you need certain upgrade parts or rating levels to qualify for a race, for safety reasons or something. It sort of does that with the wheelie competition. And for the visuals, certain decals for sponsorship reasons which give you bonus points and earnings. Here, it felt like it was designed to make your life harder than necessary. Like the cars you win can't be visually changed, and nor can I copy the pre-made performance options onto another blueprint. I own the car with those upgrades and I know how they work on a track. Why can't I at least change the way it looks? Not everybody who plays this should be expected to know how this all works without instructions, especially if Need for Speed games in the past are all about simple, fast-paced action on the road. And this leads me to the driving mechanics. 70% of all the notes I gathered while playing ProStreet have all got to do with this part. Have I got a lot to say? Firstly, cars take damage, which not only affects performance, but at the end of a race you need to pay for the damages. You technically don't need to, but otherwise you're entering an event with scrap. They can flip over too, but unlike the predecessors, this means the end of your race. and the more expensive the car is, the more exposed they are to damage. Going back to my beloved Pagani Zonda, I noticed that it would damage very easily, and the price to repair it was so unreasonable it wasn't worth using it. Another beginner's trap for buying fast cars early. It's like driving an F1 against hot hatches. Sure, you might dominate, but you need to be more careful too. Remember when I said the faster the car, the faster you need to drive to earn points? Well, now I'm not so sure about that, because theoretically this damage model is discouraging you from making your cars go faster. Despite this, I'm okay with damage in a racing game. In fact, the first ever Need for Speed title in high stakes had it before this, and it's funny watching bonnets fly off the car at top speed and side mirrors dangling like dogs' ears. The only idiotic thing about it is that you have to pay for the damages every time you restart. By the time you've reached the latter part of the career mode, you would have earned enough money in repair markers for it to be a non-factor, but they're not infinite. I believe the game designers did this because they must have known how easy it was to win and wanted to create an alternative to the wanted system, as damaging the car and being left out of pocket will end your race day. That's what the promotional events in which all cars are the same for, so you can earn money without paying for the damages. I've always wondered why you mostly start at the back of the line. Now I know why. So if you think you're going to have a serious collision, restart before it happens. And don't think for a second that it's easy to avoid damage. In a typical Need for Speed game around the 6th generation era, it was one of the key definitions of arcade racing, along the likes of Mario Kart, Crash Team Racing, F-Zero, Midnight Club, Project Gotham Racing, etc. It was easy to pick up and play, and had more colours than the new ColourShed logo. They're all exciting games, and with all that's going on outside the track exaggerating the theme a bit, you'd think the driving mechanics might be no different. Well, they are. The developers went to Porsche's test track in Leipzig to collect data from cars that would appear in the game. In hindsight, you can understand why they did this. They wanted the player to get a small taste of how these cars handled in real life, change things up after Carbon was considered a disappointment, and with the 7th generation becoming more prominent, they wanted to explore what the hardware can do. Rockstar, for example, felt the same way when they were making GTA 4 back in 2008, but for the sake of making the game fun to play, it was the wrong decision. After a couple of hours of gameplay, I was ready to destroy the controls for being virtually unplayable. The drag event is fine, there's no oncoming traffic, and you don't need to tap the handling to change lanes since there are only 2 drivers on the straight. Speed challenge is classic Need for Speed without the tight corners and your eyes never blinking, although you need a bit of luck on both these events to avoid instantly totaling the car as they become faster. But when it comes to the slower events, you can't really turn while braking. Going around these corners is so miserable, it's like someone pulled the plug on you. Even nitrous oxide barely helps. By the way, you only get a limited use of NOS depending on the upgrade, so you have to use it wisely. And the drift events I try to avoid as much as possible for a while because it won't corner when you want it to, and it'll swerve all over the place when you want to stay in a straight line, in slow motion. Maybe drifting was so easy in Carbon they had to overcompensate. I probably got most of my highest scores on the first heat and couldn't do better on the others because I can never get it going. It was the only part of the Rio showdown that drove me insane. I had to absolutely abuse the car in track because unlike Underground, it's apparently the best way to get points, and hope Rio didn't suddenly have more. It's until you get access to faster cars fully upgraded will the game start to change its song, and end the game on a more positive note, but only a little bit. Although it's partly why these peasant showdowns are so easy, and you can't dispute that it set a tone so bad if I wasn't reviewing this game, I would have quit on it easily. My mind was always in survival mode even if I had a huge lead, trying to keep the car on the track, but not in an exciting way like Midnight Club for example. It doesn't control well and provide a serious challenge at the same time. But if you're patient enough, it'll provide a small spark of what Need for Speed is about, just without the giant map. You see opponent cars like Porsches and Lamborghinis faster than others, so maybe it really does come down to what you drive. However, one problem that never goes away is the opponent AI, because it's clueless. They literally total their cars more often than you think, including Rio. They only recognize you when you're a meter close to them, it's like they're nearsighted, and this results in a lot of collisions on tight corners where you literally pay the price for it. The only positive thing I can say is that at least rubber banding is eliminated, but with everything else that comes with it, I don't know which is worse. Actually, that would be the way it runs. All these advertisements, grandstands, and colors look more like a distraction from the bigger picture, including pausing for a millisecond whenever a new song plays, the frame rate dropping at high speed, whatever that is, and people watching from an invisible bridge. Nice one, programmers. The detail of the cars on and off the track look impressive, fresh or damaged, but that's about it. Producer Andrew Hahn claims they developed the game specifically for 7th gen hardware, then ported it onto the PS2 and Wii. Either he's lying, or it's a clear indication that development should have been longer than what they've got. Because if you get the PS3, Xbox 360 or PC version, gameplay wise they add nothing to the table other than to throw more obstacles and advertising in your face. Even the update is sponsored. The developers can say whatever they want, it still feels like a 6th generation game. But do you know what's even worse than that? Now this relates mostly to the PlayStation 3 version, but the main purpose of updates is to fix any glitches, bugs, essentially correct any mistakes that might have slipped through development. The update in this game, however, does the complete opposite. After reaching 15% into the career mode, whenever I completed a race day, it would crash every single time. I initially thought it was doing it on a specific event, but then I tried another race day and it did the exact same thing. I knew something wasn't right, or maybe I'm just bad at buying secondhand games. Either way, I was livid. I tried deleting the update, it won't let me reload my progress. I turned off autosave, had no effect. So I did the unthinkable. Deleted the update and started the game from the very beginning to see if it did it again. And guess what? I was able to progress further, get a little bit more enjoyment from cars that I actually want to race, and eventually became the new Street King. So if you really insist on playing it and you get the PlayStation 3 version, whatever you do, don't download the update, as if being sponsored wasn't painful enough. I reckon this is where all my anger for the issues are elevated. How can an update make the game run even worse? A race day would typically take 15 minutes to half an hour depending on whether you want to dominate or win, and it would take 10 to 15 hours to reach and win against Rio. There's more gameplay time than Carbon. As I said before, I think they pulled cheap tricks to make it longer, but there are games that motivate me to complete every inch, and others where I feel obliged to grind for the sake of the review. ProStreet falls under the latter, especially if I had to play the game all over again after 10 hours of misery. Need for Speed ProStreet is one of the hardest games I've ever looked at, not in terms of in-game difficulty, but trying to explain why it's so polarizing and to come up with a convincing explanation as to why it was a misstep in the Need for Speed series. The only real advantage ProStreet has over rival racing titles in 2007 is being able to play it on multiple consoles, but its mechanics show its age even back then, and even if they did it right, they're too counterintuitive for a Need for Speed game, therefore reducing the demographic. Going back to the theory as to why the series was on the decline, Project Gotham Racing 4, for example, has better graphics, more cars, tracks, and above all, it controls better, and that's why it was so well received. It didn't take away what made the predecessors beloved to begin with. Plus, it only took a year longer for the game to be made. And that's another reason why ProStreet feels the way it does. If you saw what Black Box were developing after Need for Speed Carbon, you'd feel kinda sorry for them. They released Skate, NBA Street Home Court, and Need for Speed ProStreet in the same year. And it's even crazier that two of those games have at least an 80 on Metacritic. That would be impossible for a developer to do now. Why would you make one developer make 3 games that include Need for Speed, one of your landmark franchises? Black Box should have been given an extra year or two to really show what they can come up with. Therefore, what you have is a game that tries to differ as much from the predecessor as possible, follow the latest trend, and program it so that it runs on multiple consoles, on top of developing 2 other games at the same time in 1 year, so they never had a chance to refine all the issues, like that moment where it crashes every single time I win a race day. Good lord! I get where they were going with this legal twist. It was becoming the norm back then, and there are a couple of decent ideas like having to use multiple cars for unique events, for example. It's just that the cons overweigh the pros, and it becomes more evident when you look at what they did the next year. Imagine how much of a difference maker it would be if it solely focused on the 7th generation graphically, added more cars, tracks, control options. Basically, what if Need for Speed Shift with bits and pieces of ProStreet thrown in there came out straight after Carbon? I guess it's easier said than done because it was early in the 7th generation, and the consoles were quite expensive, especially the PlayStation 3, so not everybody owned one yet. The kindest way to sum up this game, it's another gamble into another era like Underground, but didn't work out as well as they would have hoped. They should have been more careful with what they were doing, what they were changing, and this is what you've got. And I say it's not worth going back to.